was early morning at Fort Davis Air Base, just past 6 o'clock, and the briefing room carried the familiar mix of jet fuel, burnt coffee, and restless energy. Pilots from the 81st Fighter Squadron filled the space, leaning back in metal chairs, trading jokes, and pretending they weren't nervous. The metallic hum of the overhead lights mixed with the rustle of flight suits and the occasional scrape of boots. It was deployment day, and the air buzzed with that thin edge between arrogance and anticipation. The door opened, and Captain Nora Hale stepped inside, 31 years old. Calm posture, helmet tucked under one arm. Her patch showed a gray A-10 silhouette stitched cleanly above her call sign. Viper 2-1. The chatter faltered for a moment. Then came the low chuckles that always followed her presence. Someone murmured about PR flights. Another about quotas. She didn't look their way. She just moved to an empty chair in the front. Setting her helmet quietly on the table, her silence filled the room more than their laughter ever could. Colonel James Weston, the wing commander, walked to the podium, his tone flat and measured. Operation Ridgefire was on the screen behind him. A map marked with red ridges and a narrow valley labeled Cororin. 300 soldiers from the 10th Mountain Division were trapped under heavy artillery. Communications intermittent. The mission would require precision, low-altitude coordination, and total discipline. Weston assigned Captain Ethan Reeves as flight lead, his voice cutting through the tension. Reeves straightened, grinning, while Hale's name followed as secondary escort. A few pilots exchanged looks, their expressions smug but restrained. As Weston continued, the room buzzed with quiet energy. Reeves asked a question about strike windows. Hale took notes, her eyes locked on the terrain projection. A round hair. Whispers drifted, speculating about her lack of combat stories or how she earned her seat. She didn't answer them, didn't look up. She simply studied the valley, memorizing altitudes, entry routes, and threat zones. The noise around her blurred into background static. When the briefing ended, she stood, lifted her helmet, and met no one's eyes. Quiet readiness, not pride, defined her. The world was still dark when Captain Nora Hale walked onto the flight line at Fort Davis Air Base. It was just before sunrise. The air sharp and cold, the kind that bit through the flight suit. The tarmac shimmered faintly with dew under the pale floodlights, and the low hum of generators filled the silence. Her A-10 Thunderbolt II waited at the far end of the ramp. Call sign Viper 2-1 painted below the cockpit glass. She placed her helmet carefully on the wing, running a gloved hand along the nose art that read, "Faith over fear." For a moment, she stood there, saying nothing. The quiet between her and the jet feeling almost like prayer. Tech Sergeant Dawson approached, clipboard in hand, breath visible in the chill. Together they began the pre-flight checks. Hydraulic system, check. Fuel load, verified. Gun feed alignment on the GA-8 Avenger, secured. Flap calibration, stable. Each step moved with rhythm, her hands steady, eyes tracing every line and panel. Dawson worked without small talk. Knowing this part of her ritual wasn't for conversation, she inspected the gun housing again, fingertips brushing over the metal as if listening for something. When the check was complete, Dawson nodded once and stepped back, leaving her alone with the aircraft. Private Jenkins, new to the crew, lingered nearby. He noticed the faint black ink under her shoulder, the outline of an A-10 and the numbers 0412. He hesitated before asking what it meant. Nora didn't look up from her checklist. "It's a reminder," she said quietly. Her voice carried the weight of something unspoken. She pressed her thumb against her father's old wristwatch, its cracked glass catching the first faint light of morning. Around here, hangar lights flickered on. Voice arose, And the day began, but she remained still for another breath, grounded in that silence that came before flight, the kind that always felt sacred. The memory of Syria never left her. It was 2017. Operation Falcon Gate. Just outside Raqqa, the desert air shimmered with heat and smoke. Black plumes rising where convoys had burned through the night. Captain Nora Hale flew lead formation with her wingman, Lieutenant Marcus Hale, both in their A-10 Thunderbolt IIs, call signs Viper 11 and Viper 21. Their mission was close air support for Allied ground forces, pinned along a ridge under mortar fire. The JTAC's voice cracked through comms. Calm, but urgent, calling for immediate fire support. Nora rolled her aircraft inverted, checked her altitude, and descended through the haze. The targeting reticle aligned on the ridge, and her GAU-8 Avenger roared to life. The gun's low growl cut through the battlefield as rounds tore into the mortar position. For a moment, the radio went quiet except for heavy breathing and static. Then, the missile tone sounded in her headset, a sharp, rising pulse that froze her chest. Marcus came over the radio, calling out a surface to air launch from the West Ridge. Both aircraft deployed flares. Banking in opposite directions, Nora pulled hard into a descending spiral, pulling 4 Gs as the missile streaked past her canopy. Another impact flashed behind her, a bloom of orange against the horizon. Marcus's voice came through again, strained but steady. If one of us goes down, the other keeps flying. Then silence. She circled the area, searching for a chute or a beacon, but all she found was smoke, the smell of fuel, and the fading echo of his voice. Hours later, she sat alone in the debrief room. Her gloves dropped onto the metal table, the sound sharp in the empty space. Intelligence confirmed what she already knew. Marcus was gone. The report called it unrecoverable, but she never accepted that word. From that day, she carried his folded letter inside her flight suit, reading it before every mission. His words became her promise. Keep flying, no matter what follows you. Each time she touched the throttle, each time she whispered her pre-flight prayer, she carried him with her into the sky. Fort Davis Air Base was never quiet, but the kind of noise that filled it before a deployment was different. It was layered with whispers. In the cafeteria and ready rooms, pilots swapped stories about Captain Nora Hale, each retelling adding a new twist. Some said she froze in Syria and lost her wingman. Others claimed she was a diversity headline, not a combat pilot. Every rumor came from someone who had never flown with her. The laughter that followed was sharp and careless, the kind that lived in locker rooms more than flight lines. Nora heard it all, but never reacted. She carried her coffee, reviewed flight maps, and moved through the noise like it didn't exist. Captain Ethan Reeves, loud as always, led most of the talk. He liked to provoke her in front of others, to see if the calm would crack. One afternoon, he leaned back in his chair, grinning as he told the room she flew like a textbook. He said pilots like her never trusted their instincts. Nora didn't even look up from her notes. Textbooks don't panic, she said quietly. The room went silent long enough for Reeves to realize he'd just lost the upper hand. He looked away, muttering something about luck, but the shift had already happened. Later that day, both pilots ran a simulated close air support exercise in the squadron's training bay. The scenario was a desert strike, complete with radar threats and surface-to-air fire. Reeves flew hot, breaking altitude limits, while Nora followed procedure exactly. When the simulator threw a surprise missile launch, Reeves reacted too fast and crashed. Nora waited, flanked the ridge, and neutralized the target with a single burst. The technician behind the glass logged her third perfect run. Reeves ripped off his headset and stormed out. Nora powered down her station, unhurried, her reflection calm in the darkened screen. She didn't need to say anything. The results already had The Tactical Operations Center at Fort Davis buzzed quietly before dawn. The digital clock read 600 hours. Its red glow cutting through the dim light. Colonel James Weston stood at the front, voice low but firm as he briefed the room. 300 soldiers from the 10th Mountain Division were trapped in Cororin Valley, surrounded by heavy artillery and limited communication. The valley's ridges made close air support difficult, and the weather forecast promised low visibility. Falcon Flight would deploy within the hour. Captain Ethan Reeves would lead as Falcon 1, and Captain Nora Hale would fly as Falcon 2. The mission was simple on paper but deadly in practice. Reeves leaned back in his chair, cracking a grin. Hale sat 2 seats away, eyes fixed on the topographic map, memorizing every contour. Outside, the air bit cold against the concrete. The line of A-10 Thunderbolt IIs shimmered faintly under floodlights. Ground crews moved quickly, loading ammo belts for the GAU-8 Avenger and running last-minute checks. Hale met Tech Sergeant Dawson by her aircraft, the same jet she'd flown for years. They worked through the pre-flight checklist with steady rhythm. Contrôle, surface free. Hydraulic pressure stable. Fuel load verified. Countermeasures armed. Nose wheel steering engaged. Everything read green. Reeves's voice came over the radio, teasing her about keeping up. Hale's reply was quiet and level. All professionalism. Both aircraft taxied toward runway 22 left. Weston's order cleared them for takeoff. The engines screamed as twin TF-34 turbines reached full power. The jets rolled forward, wheels lifting just as the horizon broke with the first light of morning. At 10,000 feet, the mission came alive. Through the haze, columns of smoke rose from Cororin Valley. JTAC calls filled the frequency, clipped and tense. Ground troops pinned between 2 ridges. Anti-air fire from concealed positions. Reeves led the formation, ordering Hale to maintain high cover. Her radar warning receiver pulsed. A steady spike from grid Bravo 9. Sam radar. She called it out, but Reeves dismissed it as a ghost ping. Seconds later, the missile alert tone screamed. Both aircraft deployed flares and broke hard. The first missile streaked past Hale's canopy, but the second hit Reeves's right engine. Fire erupted across his nacelle. He called a mayday and ejected. Hale's radar filled with static. Weston's voice barked over comms, ordering her to maintain altitude and await recovery. Below, the JTAC's voice broke through the interference, pleading for cover. Hale's hands tightened on the throttle. Her response was calm. Not while they're still breathing. She pushed forward, nose down, diving toward the valley and the chaos waiting below. The instant Nora Hale pushed the throttle forward, the A-10 Thunderbolt II dropped into Cororin Valley. Like a stone, the altimeter spun down from 6,000 to 200 feet in seconds. The roar of the twin TF-34 turbines, drowning out every other sound. Her radar warning receiver flashed red. The screen alive, with missile locks and tracer fire. She switched her targeting system to manual blank sporting daughters, silenced the terrain proximity alarm, and steadied her grip on the control stick. Below, the valley burned. Convoys smoldered. Artillery flashed, and soldiers scrambled for cover under relentless fire. She flew straight into it, calm and deliberate, weaving between the smoke columns as if she could see through chaos itself. Her GAU-8 Avenger cannon spun up with its signature growl, a deep mechanical roar that rattled through her chest. She lined up the reticle manually, tracing a ridge where enemy artillery hid beneath camouflage netting. The first burst tore through the hillside, 7 barrels spitting depleted uranium rounds at nearly 4,000 rounds per minute. Dust and flame erupted as the position vanished. Over the radio, the JTAC called in confirmation, voice barely audible through static INT. Splash 1. She banked hard left, pulling 3 Gs, skimming the ridge so close that treetops grazed her wingtips. Another gun nest appeared ahead. She rolled level, squeezed the trigger, and the cannon's thunder answered. The ground shook as the bunker disintegrated under the impact. Inside the command center, the radar feed flickered. Her signal disappeared beneath the terrain. One officer cursed, thinking she was down. Another leaned closer to the monitor and said she wasn't lost. She was hunting. Back in the cockpit, Nora's oxygen mask fogged from heavy breathing. She wiped the visor clear, speaking softly to herself. "Stay with me. Marcus." Her thumb brushed the trigger switch again, hands steady despite the vibration of the damaged airframe. At Fort Davis, a young lieutenant watching her telemetry froze. Her flight path matched the classified trajectory from Syria, the same pattern flown by Viper 2-1 years earlier. Colonel Weston realized it before anyone spoke. She wasn't breaking orders. She was finishing something that began long ago. Nora switched to her AGM-65 Maverick missiles, selecting infrared targeting. A moving heat signature flashed across the screen. She locked, released, and the missile streaked downrange. The explosion tore through the valley floor, rolling shockwaves across the canyon walls. Over the radio, the trapped troops erupted in cheers. Enemy fire faded. Warning lights still flashed across her panel, but her voice was calm. "One more pass," she whispered to the jet. "One more, and we go home." The valley was finally quiet. The thunder of artillery had faded, and the smoke that once blackened the sky thinned into a pale gray mist. Captain Nora Hale's voice came over the comm channel, calm and steady, reporting that all enemy positions were destroyed. In the command center at Fort Davis, Colonel Weston listened in silence. Around him, the operators exchanged looks of disbelief as telemetry confirmed her A-10C was still flying. Moments later, JTAC verified that the ground troops were clear for extraction. Weston's voice softened when he keyed the mic, acknowledging her performance with a weight that carried respect more than rank. Hale responded with a brief copy, her tone even, though exhaustion pressed behind every word. She circled the valley once more, watching through her canopy. As convoys began to move below, the soldiers looked up, waving, the sound of her engines echoing through the clearing haze. Under her breath, she whispered that Marcus would have been proud. The horizon ahead burned gold with the rising sun. The mission clock ticked past 10:30 a.m. as she turned north for home. Her A-10 shook from damage, paint scarred, hydraulic warnings flashing amber across the console. The voice of the tower came through static, clearing Falcon 2 for approach to runway 22 left. She ran through the landing checklist, lowering the gear manually. Fuel pressure steady. Flaps confirmed. Throttle to idle. The landing was heavy, the tires smoking as the jet rolled down the strip. When the engines wound down, the silence felt heavier than the noise. Ground crews ran toward her aircraft but slowed to a stop when the canopy hissed open. Nora climbed down the ladder, each movement deliberate, her boots touching the concrete with the weight of everything she had left in her. Colonel Weston approached from the flight line, his uniform still dusted with sand. He stopped in front of her, the disbelief in his eyes replaced by something quieter, respect. Behind him, trucks carrying the rescued soldiers lined the tarmac. The first salute came from a wounded sergeant leaning on his rifle, then another, and another, until the entire line stood at attention. Nora removed her helmet, sweat and soot streaking her face. Weston started to speak, but she cut him off gently. "Just doing my job, Sire." The words carried no pride, only truth. The airfield was silent except for the cooling tick of her engines. And in that silence, every man and woman there understood what courage looked like. Night had settled over Fort Davis Air Base, calm and heavy after the storm of war. The hangars were quiet, their steel frames humming faintly as engines cooled, and the last crews headed home. Inside one of them, Captain Nora Hale sat beneath the nose of her A-10 Thunderbolt II, the jet that had carried her through fire and back again. The words painted across its fuselage, "Faith over fear," were streaked with soot and sand. She ran a rag across the letters. Slow and careful. The movements more like a ritual than maintenance. The scent of oil, metal, and smoke lingered in the still air. Mixing with the faint sound of the wind slipping through open hangar doors, everything about the moment felt sacred. She reached into the chest pocket of her flight suit and pulled out a folded sheet of paper. The edges were worn, the ink faded from time and sweat. It was the letter Marcus Hale had written her before Syria, the one she had carried through every mission since. Her thumb traced the crease lines as she read the same sentence she always stopped at. "If you ever have to fly alone, don't let fear speak louder than your heart." Her breath caught in her throat, but there were no tears. Instead, a small smile broke through. Quiet and real. She whispered into the stillness that she had kept her promise. She stood slowly, leaving the rag on the floor beside her. The hangar lights dimmed until only a soft amber glow spilled across the concrete. Her shadow stretched long against the jet's curved frame. She placed one hand on the cool metal, the same skin of the machine that had carried her through the valley and back. Outside, the stars hung low over the runway. For a heartbeat, she imagined Marcus there, waiting, the same way he used to after every clean landing. The narrator's voice drifted in softly, almost like a memory. Courage doesn't shout. It flies silent, low, and steady until the mission is done. Nora turned toward the light at the hangar's edge, her patch catching the faint glow. Viper 2-1. Lingsu, ER. What was once a mark of loss now meant survival. In the end, Captain Nora Hale's story wasn't about heroics or glory. It was about quiet courage, the kind that lives in silence and discipline, in every choice made when no one is watching. She flew not for recognition but for the lives that depended on her. Her strength was never loud. It was steady, precise, and deeply human. Courage doesn't shout. It flies low, silent, and steady until the mission is done. If her story moved you, take a moment to honor those who keep flying. Leave your salute in the comments, and share this story so her spirit keeps flying too.